Hello and welcome to Fuse, the global podcast from the PRCA. My name's Dan Gold, and in this episode, we explore the evolving landscape of global communications. We bring together leaders from public relations, politics, business, academia, and media to spark new ideas and ignite innovation. On this episode, we have a fascinating conversation with Darryl Sparey, where we touch on everything from public relations firms missing a trick when it comes to CRM and analytics, to parenthood and the mighty Master Yoda. Darryl is managing director and co-founder of Hard Numbers, the multi-award winning performance-driven communications consultancy. He co-founded Hard Numbers to be the communication consultancy that clients' sales teams love. After 8 years leading sales and marketing at Precise, now Kantar Media, he moved to an SEM agency where he firsthand saw the power of both brand and brand search as a critical element of success for companies when it came to transacting online, and then moved into PR and communications as a board director of leading tech specialists consultancy Hotwire. Darryl is a fellow of both the PRCA and CIPR, and is a CIPR chartered practitioner and member of AMEC. But if you speak to him, you'll find that his most important job is that of father to his children, Hudson and Halia. And here is our conversation. Darryl, welcome to Fuse. It's a delight to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to have been invited to partake.
I talk to a lot of people on here. Farzana talks to a lot of people on here. We both consume podcasts from other people. I'm one of those that gets up in the morning. I check my messages, then social media, then the news, and then I pop on a podcast if there's nothing breaking. For you, what's that normal, regular morning look like?
I mean, I'm the same. I check my phone. Sadly, it's the first thing I look at when I actually, let me qualify that. My son is normally the first thing I look at in the morning because he's normally crept into our bed and he's normally tapping me on the head at about 5:30 in the morning saying, go and get me milk. But after that, I will then look at my phone and I'll tend to look at Twitter, X as it now is. I still call it Twitter first, and that tends to be the sort of primary source of news for me. And then after I've been to the gym throughout the day, I'll be looking at LinkedIn and Twitter. Typically as my main sources of news, but also from BBC and things like that directly as well.
As someone who is very aware of what happens in the world of media and online, how have your habits, how have your behaviours changed in terms of news consumption, whether it's first thing in the morning or throughout the day? Is Twitter still the pinnacle of the instant now news medium?
Okay, so there's two questions in there. I'll answer the second one first. Sadly, no. I don't get anywhere near the level of utility that I used to get from Twitter, X, as it is now. Obviously, in no small part because they got rid of blue ticks. That it's a bit of it's so hard to get verified sources of information there now. There's a lot of awful stuff on there now. A lot of good people have left as well, and there's no real Twitter. I mean, I think its brand positioning is still it's what's happening. It's still that it still has it still is the pulse of the internet, but that pulse is a lot less frequent and a lot less healthy than it used to be previously. One other thing I think is interesting about media consumption habits, I have started reading newspapers in physical printed media form again recently, particularly at the weekend, on the Sunday in particular. Always get the Sunday Times now. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted to, because I was just reading it on my iPad, but I wanted my kids to see me reading a newspaper. I think there's something valuable to that, and for the same reason I stopped reading books on my Kindle and I buy them as physical hard copy books now because I want my kids to see me reading books. I think there's something important to that, not spending so much time on a screen. Um, I also think, it's important, right? I think too few PR people invest actually in the media ecosystem they're completely reliant on. Where that is simple things like buying newspapers and stuff like that, but that's also things like funding advertising, but doing partnerships and things like that with the media outlets that they want to pitch. So that's something that I've made a very conscious effort to do because we all rely on a healthy media ecosystem.
I find that fascinating. The fact that you want to share that message with your children, that picking up a book, stepping away from a screen is an important thing. By extension, do you believe that the digital monitoring tools that we have are brilliant, but there's no replacement for actually going through and reading and consuming news as a news consumer?
Yes, I think so. It's not necessarily about the sort of digital, tools or things like that, but there is a sense of, particularly for print media, like context is completely shorn from you if all you do is look at the coverage that you're sent by your media monitoring partner as a PDF, and you don't actually see, well, where did that feature within the publication? What was the other things that was around it? Etc. So that's part of it. Um, another part of it is just, I think it's just good practice to have ink on your fingers as a public relations practitioner, right? I think it's just something that you should do. I always have had, because of what I've done professionally, and I suppose always will do.
I think it was Billie Eilish has just announced that she's got a new album coming out, and she said, "Hey, I've got a new album. Don't buy individual tracks, buy the whole thing. It's a concept album. It has a journey to it. Whether you're into her music or not, it's nice to see that an artist, a creator, is saying, hey, there is this whole context to this. It very much in the way that you've just spoken specifically about how does this fit into the landscape of that publication, rather than it just being the piece on its own. And that contextualization, I always remember when I did manual coverage books and media monitoring years and years ago, we had a service. Kantar was great. They, provided material, etc., and different, monitoring services. But actually going out in the morning, hitting prep, going and grabbing all the newspapers from Tesco and sitting there and going through it and saying, well, here's our story, but our competitors' stories here is in a better position. It's quite similarly themed. How can we, during the radio day or something, just maybe sharpen it up a little bit to add a little bit more to this? So it was always interesting to look at that context. Your journey into the world of public relations and how you got into this. How did you get inspired to join this interesting world?
I was absolutely. I'm from a very humble background. I had no money when I was at university, and it would get to the end of every single term, and at that point, I would be like, literally begging on the streets for cash, going into the bursary office and making another application for more money, all the rest of it. And anyway, got to the end. I wanted to be on the radio. Anyone listening to this will think, well, you don't have the requisite skills or the right tone of voice or intonation for that, and they're probably right. But there was a media day at the university I was at Reading Uni. And just as I was walking off campus, my girlfriend at the time said to me, do you know there was a company back there that pay you £10 an hour to read the newspapers? I didn't say anything to her. I just dropped the bag that I had in my hand and I ran back to that to the media fair, and I saw a couple of folks there, and I said, I hear you read the media for a living, and they said, you heard we pay £10 an hour for people to read the newspapers, don't you? And I was like, yes, I did. I need money. And anyway, that business turned out to be a company called Media Report that was set up by the guy Mark Adams, a wonderful man who set up Text 100 originally. And then after he cashed in his chips there, he set up one of the things he did, many things he did, was set up Media Report. So I worked for him in a basement in Reading for a few years of my life, but while I saw out my time at university, and I used to read newspapers, and I'm very fortunate that many of the people whose names I used to read for, or were on the distribution list for coverage that we picked up, have now become personal friends. People like Andy West and Mark Pinson and people like that. But yeah, that's how I got started in the crazy world of PR, and then ended up running that business for a few years, selling that business to Precise, selling Precise to Kantar Media, now Inclusive, and then worked in the SEO industry for a few years, and then for Hotwire. So my journey to actually working for an actual PR company took a while, but I got there in the end.
It's interesting how many people are inspired to go into the world of media or want to tell stories and radio or even print, and then they end up on, we all call it the dark side. But actually it's the dance partner. I've always, you need both sides. So it's the dance partner. I hope that you got a pay rise from the £10 an hour at some point in that journey. That's the one thing I'm going to add to that.
I can tell you, if you want to make a lot of money, definitely don't found a PR agency, because the first couple of years of that were I probably net, in terms of number of hours I worked and then amount of money I took out of the business, probably earned substantially less than £10 an hour. But there you go.
Why are PR agencies still selling campaigns based on purely brand awareness?
I think the PR industry is the one of the slowest to change, and one of the least likely to adopt new technology, new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching things. It just is incredibly fortunate that the world has turned around it and keeps finding ways to benefit it through no strength of its own. And the classic example I give of that is Google's algorithm. Google have made changes to its algorithm, over the years, that have increasingly meant that links back from high quality third-party websites, like news outlets, are of increasing value to websites to help them rank for keywords that they want to rank for. None of that is anything to do with PR folks, and none of them had any of great insight into any of that. But the world changed around them, and they were able to benefit as a result. If you look at most PR agencies now, one of my critiques of a lot of PR agencies is the vast majority of them use technology that existed 20 years ago to do the work that they do for their clients on a daily basis. Most PR agencies, when they do, for example, sell-ins, we'll use an online database to go and get the names of the journalists that they're going to call. They then download that into an Excel spreadsheet. They then record the notes in an additional column that they add to the Excel spreadsheet. And then at the end of the day, they write a summary of that, an email that they send to onto their client. All of that, that whole workflow is using technology which existed 20 years ago. So I think my big critique of the industry is there are new technologies and new things that exist out there, and new ways of doing things that you really have to start adopting in your business to help innovate and help provide a better service to your clients, and a better experience for your team as an employer, so that they spend more of their time doing higher value, interesting, creative, thoughtful, work, and less time bashing around, copying data from one place to another, making pretty looking PowerPoint collages of coverage that you've secured for clients, stuff like that. It's just a waste of everyone's time and effort.
Which is exactly what was happening in 2002, 3, 4, 5, etc. Is there something that we as an industry, or that many in the industry, are missing about actually looking at those outcomes?
Yeah, the AMEC integrated measurement framework is the very best sort of document for doing this. I joke all the time that, I say joke. Every member of the Hard Numbers team has the AMEC integrated measurement framework tattooed somewhere on their body. I have it on my inner thigh. And we all refer to it, well, they don't all refer to my inner thigh, but we all refer to our own copy of the AMEC integrated measurement framework as frequently as we can. And the reason is because you start with it's the best, to be honest, it's the best framework for doing just about anything, right? Which is start with the organizational objective. What is it that we want to actually achieve? Because I bet you, if you went into the office of your CFO or CEO or the CEO or CFO of your client, and you said, what is it that you want to achieve? The answers that he or she give you will not be, we want a TikTok channel, or we want to launch a podcast, or we want to increase brand awareness, right? Those aren't the objectives of the business. The objectives of the business very often will be, we need to grow, we need to open in new markets, we need to launch this, new product, we need to improve our balance sheet health, we need to improve EBITDA, we need to, whatever those things are, we need to communicate the innovation that is happening within our business externally so that we can get a valuation on our business, which is a multiple of revenue rather than a multiple of profit. Those will be the things that your CEO or CFO would tell you, not any of the sort of things that very often, professional communicators, PR people take as at face value. So understand what the business objective is or the organizational objective is, and then everything else you do from there, the inputs that you need to better understand the organization, the outputs, the things that you're going to create as a result, the outcomes that you're going to be the outputs that you're going to create, the outcomes that you're going to drive, and ultimately the outcomes and outtakes that are going to happen as a result of your activity, and ultimately, what is that going to deliver for the business? That's the organization that you're working for. That is that's the way to approach any communications brief.
I don't want to be controversial. I'm just going to say it. I'm going to leave it on the table. I'm not going to refer to your inner thigh at all, but I'm going to leave this on the table. I am sick and tired and incredibly bored of hearing professional communicators say, we want a seat at the table. We are not being listened to. We are not being heard. When you look at the AMEC framework and you can demonstrate that piece that actually achieves those goals, those outcomes, and working backwards from there, that will give you the seat at the table. I hear so many people just going, I'm not being listened to, I'm being strategic, I'm being this, but I'm not being heard. Talk the same language and have the same mindset as that CFO, as that CEO. When you work from there backwards, you are no longer having to justify what you do because you are demonstrating what you do. That's my feeling. And I've been producing podcasts for a long time now, and communication podcasts, and producing on other people's ones. And if I hear we want a seat at the table, it is the most frustrating thing in this world. Don't justify what you're doing, demonstrate what you're doing.
100%. I've got to build for, I think I've said a lot of what you've said there to other folks in the past. I didn't say this. Rory Sutherland has got a really good line around this, but it's basically that when professional communicators go into get the opportunity to get a seat at the table and talk to the board, they do it in a language that the board wouldn't understand. They go in and they say things like, our positive share of media sentiment in tier one media was 73% of the, blah, 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 right? Just, they talk all in words. They reference things that the audience they're speaking to simply wouldn't understand. You have to talk in words that your mum or your nan can understand when you're talking about what you do and the efficacy and the impact of what you do. Not and not in any other way. Because you might as well be going into the boardroom and saying, oh, the reason this, we haven't sold as much product as we wanted to sell this month is because the feng shui in our boardroom isn't right, or the ley lines, around our offices weren't optimally placed, or whatever. I mean, you're barking up the same tree. If you're going in and you're not speaking the language of the boardroom in the boardroom.
And with all of that being said, when it comes to differentiating, if we're looking at the agency world where there's a lot of people doing a lot of the same things, how did Hard Numbers come to this conclusion that SEO tools, lead generation, and CRM were important to the core of actually getting to those outcomes and achieving those goals for organizations?
I could give you two answers to that question, the flippant one and then the one that probably my business partner would prefer me to say.
Let's go with the first one first. I'm looking forward to it.
The flippant one is, if all you've got's a hammer, everything else looks remarkably like a nail. My core skill set is around, sales. I spent most of my life doing God's work, selling things to folk. And then latterly in the SEO digital marketing space. So it's what I know. And I suppose when you then go and talk to clients, you talk to them from, you provide consultancy in the areas that And if I think about my business partner, Paul, again, he had a background in paid and digital. And, he's excellent on the kind of creativity side of things. And so those are the areas that he brings to the table when we go and talk to clients. But if I wasn't being so flippant, and I was going to answer that question at a more intellectual level, it's because ultimately what you have to differentiate, right? So you have to find out what is it that you can offer that other agencies can't or won't, for whatever reason, or what is that sort of unmet need you feel, or what is that most commonly occurring objection that you hear from customers, right? 50%, 63.7% of all statistics are made up on the spot, but about 50% of people who are dissatisfied with an experience of working with a PR agency in the past will say things like, we didn't know what we were paying for. We didn't know what we get. We didn't get anything as a result of paying all this money to them. Like there was no kind of tangible outcome that came with the activity. Or they'll say it's too top of funnel and it's not where we need our activity to be, which is further down the funnel, right? So therefore you think, okay, well, if I can address those objections, if I can align myself and the offering as an agency to be more focused on results and being able to demonstrate that we have actually tangibly driven a result, so you can see what both the activities that we're undertaking to drive those results, and don't confuse activity with results, as my finance director used to say to me, and then we can actually show the results that we've driven, the increase in traffic, increase in downloads, increase in leads, increase in, opportunities in your pipeline, whatever those things are. And then on the other side of things, I think it's about being able to demonstrate an alignment ultimately with the objectives of the client. If you can demonstrate to the client that they're making a useful investment and they're driving a return from their investment in PR and communications, then that is absolutely positioning you in a way that is different to a lot of other PR agencies, or that runs counter to a lot of their perceptions or thinking about other PR agencies that are out there.
I remember a campaign from an organization that I knew at arm's length. It was not maybe the best targeting. They sold this campaign to this brand, this clothing brand, and the sell was up here. The reality was probably here, and the actuality when there was breaking news on that day was down here. What happened from there was I know that there was a mass panic in this office, And my friend Stacey, she came to me and went, I need a very large bottle of wine. It's not a very large glass of wine. It was a very large bottle of wine. We're stuck. We're at the point where we've got to go back to the client with coverage. It's like, well, what are you going to do? And she went, my boss has just told me to go out and pay for a ton of advertorials instead. So I just said, and what do you think? She went, pass me the wine. Like, there's one thing to sell a campaign to a customer, to a client. There's another thing to overpromise and underdeliver. And when that happens, it's found out incredibly quickly, which again, that fault in not defining from a client perspective, what do we want it to achieve, and saying yes to something you're pitched that sounds, hey, you know what, I think this is something that we need. Or I remember when I worked in the world of IT, there was my old boss in my first job, and he said, the IT world is full of acronyms. It's full of all of this, and you can say all these words a bit like you were saying. And there's one thing to remember, and I want you to take this to every meeting and every session you have with a customer. BBB. I said, well, what's BBB? And he went, bollocks baffles brains. If I ever hear you talking nonsense, using acronyms, just throwing terms at people to effectively make yourself look smarter, then you're out. And that is something that ethically I've carried with me since day one, because if I can't communicate in plain language, then I'm not in the right space. And we've all been to those trade meetings where we see someone else get up on the stage and they're throwing everything at it, and you're just saying, pull it back. It's all it needs.
Do you know what I really like about that first example that you cited, right? I think a lot of that is what is wrong with the way PR people talk about what we do. And a lot of people think they give themselves an excuse not to succeed, where they'll say it's earned media, it's not paid media, so we can't make any guarantees, right? We make a guarantee at Hard Numbers. We say we write our KPIs, which very often have a number of media opportunities we create for a client in a given period, into our contracts. And we have a clause in our contract that says we will hit our KPIs in any given quarter, or we'll work at our costs until we do. And as at this point right now, we've worked with more than 70 businesses, and we've yet to have to exercise that clause. But the reason for that is because if a campaign isn't going well, and we can see from the analysis in terms of the open rate that we're seeing from journalists that we're sending pitches to, in terms of the responses we're getting versus the number of emails that we're sending out, that we're seeing in our HubSpot instance, the number of media opportunities we're creating as a result, all this data we can see in real time through when we're doing a campaign, right? We can then go, okay, well, what else? How we know we have a target to hit here. We've committed to hit that target. How else are we going to go about hitting that target? So then you can think about, okay, well, if we're not going to get there with the news as it is there another way we can slice and dice that news? Or is there a way that we can work through the make the results, if it's a survey or something, specific to different verticals, like trade verticals or sectors or something like that, and then do a specific sell-in just to the trade media addressing that vertical, for example, focusing on the companies or the findings or whatever that are focused on that vertical? Can we do bylines to extend the life cycle of something like this? And can we start pitching in bylines now? Because we're really going to have to do it. Can we get podcast interviews with podcasts that talk about this topic area that we could pitch the CEO or whoever from the organization we're representing in to talk about the findings of this result? But basically, how can we make sure that for this campaign, by the end of this campaign, we have definitely secured N numbers of media opportunities, whether that is the news of the release itself or whether that's all the other different ways that we'll go about getting the cover. We don't let ourselves make the excuse of, oh well, tried, but sadly, for the Queen died, so no one's writing any coverage about stuff. So sorry, we never do that, right? Obviously, we're not going to launch. We actually had a campaign that was going to launch the week that Her Majesty passed away, sadly. So we had to put a pin in it for a few weeks or whatever to get the other side of it. But the point is still valid. You do not let ourselves make up the excuse either to ourselves because we're honest to ourselves, but also to our clients because we're honest to our clients that oh well, we tried and it didn't work out. No, we'll keep trying until it works out.
The integration of CRM and lead gen and public relations to me is a very natural one, and it makes perfect sense. Specifically, that you can track all these actions and markers through the journey, where I'm still shocked when, I put a campaign out to an agency or, multiple agencies since I've gone in-house, and the analytics just comes as the bit at the end. Where are we failing as an industry to just leave analytics to the end?
Yeah, I love that point. It's something I talk about all the time, because if you do that, it's like, what people always say about accountants, right? All accountants do is bayonet the dead. They just turn up right after the war's been fought and they just, bayonet the dead. So it provides doesn't help us win the battle, right? Doesn't tell us how many bullets we've got left to fire or whatever, right? So I'm a big believer in using insight and analysis to both inform the strategy that we're going to undertake, but also to use it live as we're going to understand how we can be more successful in what we're doing, and how we can continually then, when we see success in a particular area, increasingly optimize to drive further success throughout that activity that we're doing, not just for that individual campaign, but for our clients as a whole. Case in point, going back to that workflow I talked to you about earlier, if for every single campaign you're just downloading an Excel spreadsheet and putting it in a folder somewhere for that client, that is rich data about your relationship with those journalists and those publications that isn't getting fed back into the loop for everyone else in the business, and both now and in the future, to know how many times have we pitched a particular journalist at a particular trade outlet today, this week, this month, this year, and how many times have they opened the emails we've sent them, and how many times have we created a media opportunity for our clients as a result. Every time we pitch with a prospective new client, we can look at the media outlets that industry or their audience pay attention to, and we can see where we have the best relationships with the journalists at the publications that address those sectors, and we know where we're most likely to succeed and most likely to be able to secure coverage, because we've got demonstrable data going back for the past nearly 4 years on just that.
With this journey that you've been on, with the technology that has evolved over time and the willingness to adopt technology, how have you found that line for you, the desire to embrace physical media, embrace physical newspapers, and being very screen-based? Have you found that balance that so many of us are seeking, where you found the zen of, I can now put the screen down?
Oh man, I wish I could. I no, I'm terrible for it. I mean, you should speak to my missus. She tells me off. Or I mean, we both run our own businesses. We're in and around the creative space, and yeah, I'm terrible for it. I would have an ambition that one day I'll be the kind of man and father that I want to be, that I can be more present generally to the people I'm with, to to my kids, all the rest of it. we were out as a family the other day, and we looked. We were in a soft play, which anyone who's listening to this who's a parent will have been in a million of these things. I've been in every soft play within a 30-mile radius of my house in Bournemouth. I know them all at the back of my hand. So we're in the soft play, and I looked over, and there was a family opposite us, and every single member of that family were on their phones, and they weren't looking at the kids, and they weren't like spending, and they weren't present in the moment. They weren't present with the kids. They weren't, Now, look, I get it, right? Sometimes you take your kids to the soft play just to let them play so you can catch up on a couple of things and have some alone time, whatever. But for the whole time to be so engrossed in your phone and not to be engrossed in the beautiful little wonders of joy and interest and questions and thoughtfulness and everything else that are your kids is to rob yourself of the greatest gift in the world.
I don't know if it's still there, but there used to be a really good soft play in Poole Park. And
the Ark! That was the soft play I was thinking of. That's amazing. Where did that come from?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say anything, but Bournemouth born and bred. So, wow. It's funny that you should say it, because one of my favorite memories with my son's now 13. Yeah. I can't remember why. I think it was just that I took my son when he was about 4 years old. We went to a hotel on Niverton Road. No one else is going to get this. I went to a hotel on Niverton Road, right? And it's of a famous, terrible hotel group that buys heritage properties. I'm not going to name them. But it was a dreadful experience. But it was me, my son, and my dad and my stepmother. And I left the phone to a minimum for that whole trip. We'd come down from London because I moved from Bournemouth to London. And it was just that connecting with my son. And it is the most magical trip I've ever been on with him. And now he's into, various platforms and various games and designing games and doing video editing, and good for him. But I now know how little attention that he does. It's a bit like cats in the cradle. It's not all about me and desiring crazy levels of attention. But isn't it interesting that connection as a human being? I think PR people, communicators, people who work with an always-on media are particularly terrible at putting the device down, because there is that endorphin, there's that need, there's that urge to stay on top of it constantly. And even during, Christmas dinner, turning the phone to silent, having it in vibrate in the pocket, whatever it is, I would happily crush my phone for 3 days and get a new phone. I think that there is a lesson from this episode, which is put the device down, pick up a newspaper, spend time with the kids. And I like what you said about just being the father or being the person that you want to be. And I think there's a lot in that. As we get towards the end of this episode, I'm very cognizant of the time. I want to pull a quote for you, because I'm seeing all of the Star Wars stuff in the background as I've got my Doctor Who stuff here. International listeners will be like, Doctor Who? The quote is from Phantom Menace, clearly the greatest Star Wars film of all time. I'm not judging. It's the ability to speak does not make you intelligent. I bring this in at the point where sometimes, just sometimes, you have... let me put this into context. I went to a conference. It was an international conference. There were all these brilliant speakers speaking on multiple brilliant topics, and they all had to go through panels to get selected to be able to speak at the conference, and it was amazing. And everyone was genius. But there was something about the British delegation, and it was only the British delegation. It was this speaker who was then surrounded by 3 people who stood there and clapped from their own team. They were saying something brilliant, but what was the need? What was the culture within that organization to feel the need? Oh, marvelous, darling. You marvelous. Like, what was the need for that? It was a good talk, but I don't know. Did it move the needle any more than anyone else's? Anyway, that was just a rant. Talking of which, when you look at inspiration, whether from the world of media, from journalism, from anywhere else in the world, what inspires you in terms of storytelling, insight, inspiration?
Yeah, there's probably three main sort of sources of inspiration. Maybe the first is comic books. I've got tons and tons of comic books here. If I move the camera over that way, there's tons and tons of graphic novels, which are, for anyone who's not into comic books, like collections of comic books in trade paperback form. I adore them. I have done since I was about 11 years old. I'm from a council estate in Dorset. My comic books are my way out. Comic books enable me to see the cosmos from a bus stop. Right. I love them, and always have done since that age. So comic books are a big thing that for anyone who's interested, if you're in the PR industry and into comic books, I've got a WhatsApp group of some very fine fellow communicators who are all into comic books as well. You can join, my friend. You can join. Hit me up on WhatsApp. We'll make it happen.
I'm going to do it.
Great. Then I love that you made that. You talked about listening to records earlier. Like I grew up I was a sort of teenager in the early 90s. And so like old school hip hop, again, is probably something I love. Favorite communicators would be people like Chuck D and Wu-Tang Clan and stuff like that. I love the fact that you can now go to gigs and I saw Wu-Tang perform Enter the 36 Chambers as an album, basically. Sadly, Method Man wasn't there for it, but all of the rest of the Wu-Tang Clan were huge. That's a big source of kind of creativity and something that I love and I listen to and I'm inspired by a lot. And then I read a lot of books from people like Daniel H. Pink, Malcolm Gladwell, Levitt and Dubner, folks like that. That's another thing that I read a lot about. I love ideas and new ways of thinking and seeing things slightly differently. I know lots of people have had a pop at it, but I wrote my son a poem, and I told him that one of the most inspiring things you can know is that if you do something for 10,000 hours, a cognitive skill, you can be the best person in the world at it. All that stands between you and a chess grandmaster is 10,000 hours of time. And once you know that, it's an incredibly empowering thing to know. So, those are my three kind of sources of inspiration or creativity or media that I pay attention to.
As you look back on that kid that was on a housing estate in Dorset growing up, immersed in the world of comic book storytelling and the things that inspired you, whether it was the escape or it was the art of storytelling, which can never be underestimated, what would you say to that lad now who has become you?
Be a bit easier on yourself. Buy shares in Apple, Google, Microsoft, and buy Bitcoin. You won't know what they are now, but just make sure you do that. And I'd, I've been, to be honest, the advice that you'd give yourself, and that I've given to my kids, hopefully, I've not always done it. I've not always lived up to be the person I'd hope I would be. But broadly, be a nice person. You've got 2 ears, 1 mouth. Say please and thank you. Open doors for people. Like, be generous with your time and your money. And know that those 2 things are as valuable as one another. If not, time is probably the most valuable thing you've got, right? Those are all things that I hope for the majority of my adult life I've been, values that I've kind of lived up to and things like that. And I would advise myself to be true to that. Work hard, be nice to people. Everything else is cream cheese.
I have no other words. If people, I was going to move on to the bit that I normally do at this point, which is if people wanted to find out more information, where could they go? But I'm going to pause that. I'm going to park it for just 1 second, because the cream cheese quote has just driven me to do this. In another of the greatest of the Star Wars movies, looking back at yourself when you were a child and that bit of be easier on yourself. In a dark place, we find ourselves, and a little more knowledge lights our way, which is a fantastic quote from Revenge of the Sith, another of the great movies.
Is that Master Yoda? Who said that?
That is Yoda that says that. And I love that you phrase it Master Yoda. So from cream cheese to Master Yoda, I want to ask you this question. If people wanted to find out more information about your organization, how to get in touch with you, where could they go?
If you go to actually, you always know if someone's worked in the SEO industry because they say www.hardnumbers.co.uk or at Darryl Sparey, DARRYL SPAREY on most platforms. There's only one Darryl Sparey, and you'll be able to find me that way.
Sorry, I was being present nearly with my Star Wars quotes.
I just quickly on the Star Wars quotes in our who we are. We have a values deck, like who we are deck, what we know, and one of the slides is a picture of Master Yoda, and the sort of line on the slide is "Do or do not. There is no try." Right? You either do something you say you're going to do, or you commit to not doing it. But you never say to someone, I'll try, because by saying I try, you both give yourself an out to not having done it, but the other person's going to hear, well, they said they're going to try. So they might take that as if they're going to do it. Right. So do or do not, there is no try. That's a good way to manage an agency, I think.
Thank you so much, Darryl, for taking the time to join us here on Fuse. And thank you for taking the time to listen. You'll find this episode on the PRCA's YouTube channel and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, alongside other episodes interviewed by myself and Farzana Badwell. A big thank you to David Olajude for being our executive producer. And if you like what you hear, please do share this so that we can grow our community. If you have any feedback or topics that you'd like us to cover, please do get in touch with all of the contact information that you can find at prca.org.uk/fuse. We publish interviews every 2 weeks, so please do stay tuned as we have some inspiring stories in the pipeline.